I received a bill for a service I never ordered. The address was my home. The signature was mine. Or at least, that's what they thought. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, wedged between a grocery store circular and something from my insurance company. The envelope was municipal beige, the kind that means someone official wants your attention. I almost tossed it with the junk mail. Almost. Coffee first. That's always been my rule. Deal with problems after caffeine, never before. The kitchen was quiet in that particular way houses get when you live alone. Not empty exactly, just waiting. Waiting for noise that doesn't come anymore. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed, doing its morning performance, and I stood at the counter with the envelope in my hand. Return address, County Municipal Services, Division of Property Access and Modification. That got my attention. I opened it with my thumb, no ceremony. Inside was an invoice, service authorization and compliance fee. Amount due, $347. Service date, pending confirmation, estimated within 14 business days. My address was correct, down to the apartment number I don't have because I live in a house. The signature at the bottom looked like mine. Same general shape, same loose capital letters at the start, but something was off. Too careful, too practiced. Like someone had traced it instead of writing it. I've been signing my name for 58 years. I know what my signature looks like when I'm in a hurry, when I'm tired, when I'm pretending to pay attention during some contractor's presentation. This wasn't any of those. This was someone else's idea of what my signature should look like. I set the paper down on the counter and poured my coffee. Black, no sugar. I learned to drink it that way 30 years ago on job sites where the only options were black or nothing, and the habit stuck. The ceramic mug was warm in my hands, grounding, real. The bill sat there looking official and correct and completely wrong. I read it again, slower this time. Property Access Modification, authorized under Emergency Provision 7C, next of kin request, submitted via electronic consent portal. Next of kin. That was interesting. I only had 2 of those. Both of them very much alive, very much not in the habit of requesting emergency anything on my behalf. We weren't the type of family that handled each other's paperwork. We were barely the type of family that returned phone calls. I checked the date on the authorization. 3 weeks ago. A Thursday. I'd been home that Thursday. I remembered because I'd spent the afternoon fixing the back gate latch that had been sticking since winter. No emergency, no crisis. Certainly no need for anyone to sign anything on my behalf. The coffee was good, strong. It helped me think. There was a reference number at the top of the invoice, the kind of bureaucratic identifier that means someone somewhere has a file, a paper trail. Documentation that says this is real and binding and someone approved it. Someone had taken my name and made it official, made it legitimate, made it look like I wanted something I definitely did not want. Property Access Modification. I turned those words over in my mind. Access. Modification. Both of those required getting into my house. Both of those required my permission. Both of those, apparently, someone thought they already had. The service date detail was what really hooked me, though. Estimated within 14 business days. Not a past charge for work completed. Not a late fee for something I missed. This was payment for something that hadn't happened yet. Something scheduled. Something planned. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the invoice, then another of the envelope, then one of the signature, zoomed in close enough to see the slight waver in the ink where someone had paused, uncertain. My son's house was 20 minutes away if traffic was light. His wife answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey," she said. Bright, pleasant. The kind of pleasant that means you're interrupting something, but she's too polite to say it. "What's up?" "Got a weird bill this morning," I said. Kept my voice casual. Curious, not accusatory. "Something about property access authorization. You know anything about that?" A pause. Short enough that most people wouldn't notice. Long enough that I did. "A bill?" she said. What kind of bill? County services. Says someone requested emergency access to my property. Used my signature. Another pause. Longer this time. Huh, she said. That's strange. Maybe it's a mistake. You know how the county is with paperwork. Yeah, I agreed. Probably. Just thought I'd check if you or Brian had heard anything. Not that I know of, she said. But I'll ask him when he gets back. He's at Home Depot. Sure. No rush. Just seemed odd. We said goodbye. She hung up first. I stood in my kitchen and looked at the invoice again. The signature stared back at me, almost, but not quite right. Like a mirror image that doesn't match up when you look too close. Apparently, I sign like a man who believes in people. The coffee was cold by the time I finished reading through the fine print on the back of the invoice. It was dense, the kind of legal language designed to discourage actually reading it. Lots of heretofores and in accordance withs. But buried in paragraph 6, subsection B, was the interesting part. Upon completion of authorized modifications, temporary access privileges may be assigned to designated parties as deemed necessary for inspection, maintenance, or emergency intervention purposes. Temporary access privileges. To my house. For parties I didn't designate. I grabbed my keys and headed for the municipal office. It was time to ask some neutral questions. The County Municipal Services Building was one of those aggressively beige government structures that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd seen a building once and tried to describe it from memory. Square. Efficient. Completely forgettable. The parking lot had exactly 6 trees, evenly spaced, like someone had read that public spaces need greenery, but didn't understand why. Inside smelled like floor wax and old coffee. The lobby directory listed 17 different departments, most of them with acronyms I didn't recognize. Property access and modification was on the 3rd floor. The elevator took its time. Smooth jazz played from a speaker somewhere. A man in coveralls got on at the 2nd floor, nodded at me, got off at the 3rd. We didn't speak. That kind of building discourages conversation. The 3rd floor was quieter, carpeted. The kind of quiet that means people are working but don't want to be heard. I found the property access office at the end of a hallway that seemed longer than the building should allow. The door was open. Inside, a woman in her early 30s sat behind a desk with 2 monitors and a coffee mug that said, "Mondays are for mandatory meetings." She looked up when I knocked on the doorframe. "Help you?" she asked. Professional. Not warm, not cold. Exactly the temperature you'd expect from someone who processes forms for a living. Got a question about a service authorization, I said. Held up the invoice. Came in the mail this morning. Trying to figure out what it's for. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. I sat. The chair was uncomfortable in that specific municipal way. Firm enough to keep you awake, not comfortable enough to stay long. She took the invoice from me, scanned it with the kind of efficiency that said she'd looked at 10,000 of these. Her eyes moved from line to line without her expression changing. Property access modification, she read. Authorization submitted under emergency provision 7C. She tapped her keyboard. The screens flickered. More typing. Okay, this was requested 3 weeks ago. Electronic submission, next of kin authorization. That's the part I'm confused about, I said. I'm the property owner. Nobody asked me about any of this. She nodded, still looking at her screen. Emergency Provision 7C allows for next of kin to submit requests on behalf of property owners in cases where immediate access is required for safety, health, or structural concerns. It's typically used when the owner is incapacitated or unavailable. I'm neither of those things, I pointed out. The system doesn't verify that, she said. Apologetic, but firm. The kind of firm that means the rules are the rules, and she didn't make them. If the authorization is submitted correctly with proper documentation, it gets approved. The assumption is that family members wouldn't file unless there was genuine need. What kind of documentation? She clicked through a few more screens. Copy of relationship verification, birth certificate or marriage license, proof of property connection, and either power of attorney or emergency contact designation. I never designated anyone as emergency contact, I said. Do you have a will, living trust, healthcare proxy? I did. Standard stuff. Drawn up 10 years ago when my wife was sick and we were trying to get everything in order before the inevitable. My son was listed as executor, emergency contact for medical decisions. Yeah, I said slowly, but that's medical, not property. She made a face that meant she was about to tell me something I wouldn't like. The county updated the codes 18 months ago. Emergency contact provisions were expanded to include property access in urgent situations. Saves time in cases of emergency repairs, safety inspections, that kind of thing. So my son could request access to my house just by claiming it was urgent? If he has documentation that establishes him as next of kin and emergency contact, yes. The request goes to a review board, but if everything looks legitimate, it gets approved. I sat back. The chair creaked. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang. What kind of access are we talking about? I asked. More typing. She frowned slightly, which seemed like a departure from her professional neutrality. This one's a bit unusual. Standard modification authorization is for things like emergency repairs, safety inspections, utility access. This one lists comprehensive property assessment with ongoing access privileges pending compliance review. In English? Someone would be authorized to enter your property for assessment purposes, and depending on what they find, they might maintain that access for follow-up inspections or modifications. Without me there? The owner should be notified of all scheduled access, but if they're unavailable or, she paused, choosing words carefully, if they're deemed unable to participate in the process, the authorization can proceed. Unable how? She met my eyes for the first time. Something in her expression shifted. Not quite sympathy, more like recognition, like she'd seen this kind of confusion before. The authorization request included a note flagging concerns about owner capability, she said quietly. Nothing specific. Just enough to suggest that direct communication might be complicated. There it was. The hook buried in the paperwork. Someone had suggested I wasn't capable of making my own decisions about my own property. And the county, in its infinite bureaucratic wisdom, had accepted that suggestion as fact. Who signed the request? I asked. I mean, who physically submitted it? She turned her monitor slightly so I could see. There was a form, filled out in neat digital text. At the bottom, 2 signatures. One I recognized immediately. My son, Brian. The other took me a second longer. My daughter-in-law, Jessica. Both of them. Together. Requesting access to my house on the grounds that I might not be capable of handling it myself. When's the service scheduled? I asked. She scrolled. Initial assessment is scheduled for next Wednesday. 9 a.m. You should receive confirmation notification by Friday. And if I don't want this to happen? You'd need to file a formal challenge with the review board. That takes about 2 to 3 weeks to process. The challenge doesn't automatically halt the authorization unless you can prove immediate harm or demonstrate that the request was fraudulent. It is fraudulent. I never authorized this. But your emergency contact did, under provisions that allow for that authorization. To prove fraud, you'd need to show that they acted in bad faith or misrepresented the circumstances. Which would mean proving my own son lied to the county about my mental state, about my capability, about my need for intervention. That would be a fun conversation. I thanked her for her time. She wished me luck with the kind of tone that suggested I'd need it. I took my invoice and left. The elevator ride down felt longer than the ride up. The muzak was playing something that might have been Beethoven once, before it got smoothed out and sanitized for public consumption. The man in coveralls was gone. I rode alone. In the parking lot, I sat in my truck for 10 minutes and stared at the dashboard. The check engine light had been on for 3 months. I kept meaning to deal with it. One of those things that wasn't urgent until suddenly it was. Emergency provisions, next of kin authorization, property access modification. They'd found a loophole in paperwork I'd signed a decade ago and decided I was a problem that needed managing. I started the truck. The engine caught after a second, rough but reliable, like me. Brian's place was 20 minutes away. Time to see what my son had to say about this. Before we go any further, hit the hype button, take a second to subscribe and like the video. It really helps the channel grow. And tell us in the comments, what would you do in this situation? Brian's house was the kind of place that showed up in home improvement magazines as a before photo that somehow got confident enough to publish itself. 2 stories, decent lot, paint job that suggested they'd picked whatever color was on sale. The lawn needed mowing, but not desperately. The driveway had a basketball hoop that nobody used anymore now that the kids were grown. I parked on the street and sat for a minute. Through the front window I could see Jessica moving around the kitchen, probably starting dinner. It was 4:30. They ate early, always had. Brian said it helped with digestion. Jessica said it gave them time to watch their shows. Whatever their reasons, it meant they'd both be home. The doorbell played a melody. Not quite a song, not quite random notes. Jessica answered after a few seconds. She was wearing yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in that effortless way that probably took 10 minutes to achieve. "Oh," she said. Surprised. Not quite startled, but close. "Hey, we weren't expecting you." "Spur of the moment," I said. "Brian around?" "He's in the garage. Come in, I'll grab him." The living room hadn't changed since last time. Same couch, same coffee table, with the artfully arranged books nobody read. Photos on the wall showing family moments frozen in frames. Brian's college graduation, their wedding, the kids at various ages looking uncomfortable in studio lighting. One of me and Karen from maybe 15 years ago, at some restaurant I didn't remember. Jessica disappeared through the kitchen. I heard the garage door open, voices too low to make out words. Then footsteps. Brian came in, wiping his hands on a rag. He had my build, broad shoulders, long arms, the kind of frame that's built for work, even if it spends most of its time behind a desk now. His hair was starting to thin on top. He didn't like when people mentioned it. "Dad," he said. Smiled. "Easy. What brings you by?" I pulled the invoice from my jacket pocket and set it on their coffee table. It looked out of place among the decorative coasters and the bowl of potpourri. "Got this today," I said. "Thought you might know something about it." He picked it up, read it. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. Subtle. The way his shoulders tensed slightly, the way his jaw set. "Huh," he said. "I meant to talk to you about this." "Yeah?" "It's not a big deal. Just some safety stuff. The county's doing assessments in the neighborhood, making sure older homes are up to code." "My house is up to code." "Sure, probably. But you know how it is. They have to check. Liability stuff." Jessica had moved to the kitchen doorway, listening but pretending not to. She had a dish towel in her hands, folding it repeatedly. "Why did they need your signature?" I asked. Brian set the invoice down. "They didn't, really. I just helped facilitate the paperwork. You're not always easy to reach, and they needed someone who could confirm the property details." "My phone works fine." "Yeah, but you know how the county is. They want everything documented officially. Next of kin makes it simpler." "Simpler for who?" He looked at me then. Really looked. Something in his eyes that wasn't quite frustration, wasn't quite concern. Something rehearsed. "For everyone," he said. "Look, it's just an inspection. They come in, check the wiring, the foundation, the ventilation, make sure everything's safe, then they sign off and you're done. And if they decide it's not safe, then you make the repairs, or we help you make them, That's what family does. The way he said, "We help you," landed wrong. Like I was a project that needed managing, a problem with a solution. "I didn't authorize this," I said. "You didn't have to. The emergency contact provision covers it." "There's no emergency." Brian exhaled, the kind of exhale that says he's being patient with me, being reasonable while I'm being difficult. "Dad, you're almost 60. The house is what, 40 years old? Things degrade, systems fail, the county's just being proactive. By getting you to sign paperwork that makes me look incompetent? Nobody said you're incompetent." The authorization request flagged concerns about owner capability. His expression shifted. Caught, just for a second. Then it smoothed back out. "That's standard language," he said. "Doesn't mean anything specific. It means someone told the county I can't handle my own property. It means I told them you might appreciate help navigating the bureaucracy, which you're proving right now by turning a simple inspection into some kind of conspiracy." Jessica stepped in from the kitchen. "Maybe we should all sit down and talk about this calmly." "I am calm," I said. "You seem upset," she said. Gentle, concerned, the kind of concerned that feels like condescension. "I'm curious," I said, "about why my son filed paperwork behind my back suggesting I need intervention." "It's not intervention," Brian said. "It's maintenance, property management, practical stuff that you've been putting off." "What have I been putting off?" "The gate latch, the loose shingle on the north side, the water heater that's been making that noise for 6 months. I fixed the gate latch 3 weeks ago. The shingle's fine. The water heater's supposed to make that noise. It's called thermal expansion." "See, this is what I mean," Brian said. His voice had an edge now, frustration breaking through the patient veneer. "You're so caught up in being right that you can't see when people are trying to help you. Help me by signing away access to my house? Help you by making sure your house doesn't become a safety hazard, making sure you have support, making sure you're not isolated out there dealing with everything alone." There it was, the real concern wrapped in reasonable-sounding logistics. I was alone. I was getting older. I might need help. And they'd decided I needed it whether I asked for it or not. "I appreciate the concern," I said, measured, careful. "But I don't need an inspection I didn't request. I don't need access I didn't authorize. And I definitely don't need you making decisions about my property without talking to me first." "We tried talking to you," Jessica said. "Remember last month? We mentioned updating your insurance, checking the property value, making sure everything was documented correctly." I remembered. A conversation over coffee that had felt off somehow. Too many questions about my finances, my plans, whether I'd thought about downsizing. I'd brushed it off as concern. Apparently, it was reconnaissance. "That's different from filing county paperwork," I said. "It's all connected," Brian said. "We're trying to be proactive, plan ahead, make sure you're taken care of." "I can take care of myself." "Can you?" Jessica asked. Soft, almost gentle. "Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you're struggling." That stopped me. "Struggling how?" "You barely leave the house except for groceries. You don't answer texts for days. You haven't been to the kids' events in months. You're isolated, Dad. That worries us." "I'm not isolated. I'm private. There's a difference." "Is there?" Brian asked. "Because from the outside, it looks the same." We stood there in their living room with the family photos watching from the walls. Their concern was real, I could see that. But underneath it was something else. Something that looked like impatience. Like they'd already decided I was a problem, and now they were just working through the steps to solve me. "The inspection's Wednesday," Brian said finally. 9 a.m. You should be there. It'll go faster if you cooperate." "And if I don't?" "Then it happens anyway. The authorization's already approved. Fighting it just makes it harder on everyone." I picked up the invoice and folded it back into my pocket. "Thanks for explaining," I said. "Dad, come on. Don't be like this." Like what? Stubborn? Difficult? We're on your side. Then maybe next time act like it and talk to me before signing my name to things. I left before he could respond. Jessica called after me, something about staying for dinner, but I was already out the door. The truck started on the first try, small victories. I drove home through familiar streets, turning gold in the late afternoon sun. Past the elementary school, the park where I used to take Brian when he was little, the convenience store that had been a different franchise every 5 years for the past 3 decades. My house looked the same as always when I pulled into the driveway. 1 story, brick front, small porch. Nothing special, nothing broken. Just a place where I lived and ate and slept and kept my things. Just a place that apparently someone else thought they had claim to. Inside, I made another pot of coffee, even though it was late. Sat at the kitchen table with the invoice spread out in front of me. Read it again. Then I pulled out my laptop and started searching. Emergency Provision 7C, County Authorization Procedures, Next of Kin Property Access. The rabbit hole went deep. Brian's house looked the same as always. Same paint job, same landscaping, same basketball hoop nobody used. But walking up to the door felt different tonight, like crossing into enemy territory with a temporary ceasefire that could break at any moment. Jessica answered. Her expression was neutral, carefully composed. He's in the office, down the hall. No offer of dinner, no small talk, just directions to where the real conversation would happen. Brian's home office was what you'd expect from someone who made decent money in corporate management but didn't quite make executive. IKEA desk, bookshelf with business books he'd probably never read, framed motivational poster about teamwork. He was sitting behind the desk when I came in. Deliberate power positioning. "Close the door," he said. I closed it and sat in the chair across from him. We looked at each other for a long moment. "Morrison's report came back clean," he said finally. "No violations." "I know. City review concurred. Authorizations closed." "I know that too." "So you think you won?" "I think I defended my property from unnecessary interference." He leaned back in his chair. "You know what this cost us? Time, effort, money for the authorization fee, stress dealing with your stubbornness. Should have talked to me first. We tried. You don't listen. You deflect. You say everything's fine when we can see it's not." "What exactly isn't fine, Brian? Be specific." "You're alone. You're isolated. You're living in a house that's too big for one person, and you're not getting any younger. That's my choice to make. And when you fall, when you have a stroke or a heart attack and nobody finds you for days, that's your choice too?" "Yes, that's exactly what it is. My choice. My risk. My life." He shook his head, frustrated. "You don't get it. You think this is about the house. It's not about the house. Then what's it about?" He was quiet for a moment, deciding something. Then, "It's about you giving up." That caught me off guard. "What?" "You gave up. When Mom died, you gave up. You stopped engaging, stopped caring about anything except just existing. You're not living, Dad. You're just taking up space and waiting to die." The words landed hard, not because they were wrong, but because they were partially right. I had withdrawn, had let connections fade, had stopped trying in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged even to myself. But that didn't give him the right to decide how I should live. "Maybe I did give up some things," I said carefully. "But that's not the same as being incompetent, not the same as needing someone to take over my life. Isn't it? Because from where we're sitting, it looks the same. You're barely maintaining the house. You're not seeing friends. You're not doing anything except existing. That's not healthy. Again, my choice. And our responsibility. We're your family. We have to care even when you don't care about yourself. So you decided to force intervention. We decided to do something before it was too late, before you declined to the point where we had no options. And the house, selling it, downsizing, that's for my benefit?" He had the decency to look uncomfortable. Partially. What's the other part? The practical part. The house has value. You're sitting on $300,000 of equity doing nothing with it. That money could set you up somewhere better, somewhere with support, somewhere we don't have to worry, somewhere you can keep tabs on me. Yes, is that so terrible? Wanting to know you're safe? It is when it comes wrapped in manipulation and control. Jessica knocked and came in without waiting for response. She was carrying papers, set them on the desk between us. "Show him," she said to Brian. He pushed the papers toward me. "We found a place, independent senior living, nice facility about 10 minutes from here. 1-bedroom units, community spaces, activities, medical staff on site. Monthly cost is about $3,000. You sell the house, put the equity in managed accounts. You've got 15 years of housing paid for plus income." I looked at the papers. Glossy brochures showing smiling elderly people playing cards and doing yoga. Floor plans, amenity lists, carefully staged photos designed to make institutional living look appealing. "This is what you've been planning," I said. "This is what makes sense," Jessica said. "You'd have community, support, safety, and we'd have peace of mind." "And my house? Would be sold, money managed properly, your future secured, without asking me if this is what I want." "We're asking now," Brian said. "No, you're telling me. There's a difference." He rubbed his face. Tired gesture. "Dad, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to plan for a future where you're taken care of. Why can't you see that?" "I see it. I also see that your plan requires me to give up my home and my independence and live where you can monitor me. That's not help. That's control. It's both. And you need it whether you admit it or not." I stood up. "I'm leaving." "Wait," Jessica said. "Just look at the facility. Tour it. See what it's like before you dismiss it." "Why? So you can say I considered it? So when you tell people later how difficult I was, you can say you tried reason first." "That's not fair," Brian said. "None of this is fair. You want me to give up my home so you can feel better about my life. That's not concern. That's convenience. Yours, not mine." "You're being selfish," Jessica said. Her voice had an edge now, the careful concern dropping away. "You're so focused on your rights and your property that you can't see we're trying to help you have a better life." "Better according to who? You? Because you've decided how I should live? Better according to reality. You're almost 60, alone, in a house that's going to become a burden. This is the smart move. For you, maybe. You get the house sold, the money managed, the problem father tucked away in a facility where he's someone else's responsibility." Brian stood up too. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" "It's love. It's caring enough to make hard decisions when you won't make them yourself. If you loved me, you'd respect my choices. If you loved us, you'd stop making this so hard." We stared at each other across his desk. The silence stretched until Jessica broke it. "Think about it," she said quietly. "Please. Just think about what we're offering." I left without answering, got in my truck and sat for a minute before starting it. They weren't going to stop. The inspection failing hadn't changed their fundamental plan. It just meant they needed to adjust tactics, be more patient, wait for the next opportunity, and there would always be another opportunity, another crisis to justify intervention, another excuse to suggest I couldn't handle things alone unless I changed the dynamic entirely. I drove to the 24-hour diner on Route 9, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Clinton administration. Sat in the back corner and ordered pie I didn't want. The problem was simple. They had legal tools. They had concern that looked legitimate. They had time and persistence. I had stubbornness and anger and documentation that proved I was competent. For now. But competence wasn't enough. I needed to make trying to control me more costly than leaving me alone. Needed leverage that made interference a bad strategy instead of just a temporarily failed one. My phone buzzed. Text from my lawyer. Thought you should know. I did some checking. Your son consulted with an elder care attorney 3 months ago. Asked about conservatorship procedures. Conservatorship. Legal guardianship for adults deemed unable to care for themselves. They'd been researching how to legally take control if the softer approaches didn't work. This wasn't just about a house. This was about them deciding I wasn't capable of making my own decisions, building a case they could take to court if necessary. I texted back, "What's involved in conservatorship?" Response came quickly. Medical evaluation showing incompetence, court hearing, appointment of guardian. That person controls your finances, property, medical decisions, everything. How do I prevent it? Stay competent. Document capacity. Have your own medical evaluations showing you're fine. Create advance directives that specify who can and cannot make decisions for you. And consider... He paused, dots appearing and disappearing. Consider offensive moves instead of just defensive ones. Like what? Like making their interference expensive. Harassment suits, restraining orders, public documentation of their behavior. Make it clear there are consequences. Legal warfare. Against my own son. That's what it had come to. I paid for pie I'd barely touched and drove home. The house was dark. I left it that way. Sat in the living room with just streetlight coming through the windows and thought about consequences. If I fought this legally, it would cost money I didn't have in surplus. It would be public. It would be permanent damage to what was left of our relationship. But if I didn't fight, they'd grind me down eventually. Find some vulnerability, some moment of weakness, some crisis they could leverage into control, and then I'd lose everything. Not just the house, my autonomy, my choices, my life lived on my terms. The question wasn't whether to fight, it was how. I needed something that made them stop without destroying what little family connection remained. Something that protected me without requiring lawyers and court battles and public humiliation. I needed leverage, real leverage, the kind that made them back off permanently. And sitting there in the dark, I realized what it might be. They'd built their case on documentation, on paper trails and emergency provisions and carefully constructed concern. All of it legitimate on its surface. All of it designed to look like responsible family behavior. But I'd worked in municipal systems for 30 years. I knew how documentation worked, how paper trails could tell different stories depending on how you arrange them, how the same concern that looked responsible from one angle could look like something else entirely from another. I needed to build my own case, not just defending against their claims, actively documenting their behavior, showing pattern, showing intent, showing that what looked like concern was actually a systematic campaign to take control of my property and my life. And if I needed to, I could make that documentation very public, very uncomfortable, very expensive for them in ways that had nothing to do with lawyers. Reputation is currency, especially in a small community, especially for people who care what others think. Brian had a job, a position, a professional reputation. Jessica volunteered at the kids' school, sat on a neighborhood committee. They cared about appearance, about seeming like good people. What would happen if people knew what they were really doing? Not the surface story about concerned children helping an aging parent. The real story, the manipulation, the attempts to seize control, the consultation with attorneys about conservatorship while pretending to just want safety. I wasn't going to threaten them. Threats were crude and they'd just call my bluff. But I could build the case, document everything, compile it, make it complete and damning and ready to deploy if necessary. Mutually assured destruction. Cold War doctrine applied to family dynamics. They'd leave me alone because not leaving me alone would cost them too much. It was ugly. It was calculating. It was exactly the kind of strategic thinking they'd probably never expect from their stubborn, isolated father, which meant it might actually work. I spent that night and the next day building the file, printed emails, saved texts, screenshots of their consultation with the elder care attorney. My lawyer had tracked that down through professional networks. Photos of the property documentation they'd submitted showing problems that weren't problems. Morrison's clean inspection report compiled a timeline showing when they started planning this. 3 months of prep before filing the authorization. This wasn't impulsive concern. This was systematic. Wrote a summary document explaining what each piece of evidence showed. Made it clear. Made it damning. Made it the kind of thing that would spread through a community and permanently alter how people saw Brian and Jessica. Then I printed it all. Made 3 copies. Put them in labeled folders. Called Brian Monday afternoon. "We need to meet," I said. "I thought you needed time to think." "I'm done thinking. Tomorrow noon, the park downtown. Public place, neutral ground, witnesses around but not in earshot." "Okay," he said, cautious. "What's this about?" "Ending this, one way or another." I hung up before he could respond. Tuesday morning I put 1 folder in my truck, left the other 2 with my lawyer with instructions. If anything happened to me, if I became suddenly incapacitated, if there were any attempts at conservatorship proceedings, open the folders, make them public. Insurance policy. Noon came clear and warm. The park had the usual lunch crowd, office workers on benches eating sandwiches, retirees feeding ducks, kids on the playground. Brian was waiting at a picnic table under an oak tree. Jessica was with him. I hadn't expected that, but it didn't change anything. I sat down across from them and put the folder on the table. "What's this?" Brian asked. "Documentation," I said. "Everything you've done for the past 3 months. Every authorization request. Every photo you took without permission. Every consultation with attorneys about conservatorship. Every attempt to manufacture a crisis so you could justify intervention." He opened the folder. Started reading. I watched his expression change from curiosity to concern to something close to fear. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "Same places you got your information about me. Public records, professional networks, people who know people." Jessica was reading over his shoulder. Her face had gone pale. "This makes us look like we're trying to steal your house," she said. "Aren't you? We're trying to help you. By researching conservatorship procedures, by building a case to legally take control of my life? That was just... We were exploring all options, in case things got worse. Things aren't worse. Things are exactly the same as they've been for 3 years. You just decided it was time to act on your plans." Brian closed the folder. "What do you want?" "I want you to stop, permanently. No more authorizations, no more inspections, no more suggesting I sell my house or move to a facility, no more treating me like I'm incompetent." "And if we don't?" "Then this documentation becomes very public. I'll file harassment complaints. I'll send copies to your employer, Jessica's volunteer organizations, your friends and neighbors. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you've been doing." "You destroy our reputation?" "You were planning to destroy my autonomy. This is just proportional response." We sat in silence. Around us, the park continued its normal lunch rhythm. People eating, kids laughing, life happening to people whose families weren't engaged in mutual destruction. "This isn't how family should work," Jessica said finally. Her voice was shaking. "I agree. Family should trust each other, respect each other, not manipulate and control." "We weren't trying to manipulate." "Yes, you were. You built a comprehensive plan to take over my life disguised as concern. That's manipulation by definition." Brian was staring at the folder like it might explode. "If we agree to back off, what happens to this?" "It stays filed with my lawyer. Insurance policy. You leave me alone, it stays private. You try anything else." I shrugged. "Then everyone learns the truth." "You're blackmailing us," he said. "I'm establishing consequences. You tried to use the legal system against me. I'm just showing you how the same strategy works in reverse." "We're your family." "Then act like it. Respect my choices. Trust that I can manage my own life. And if you can't do that, stay away. Jessica was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away angrily. We were scared. We were worried about you. Then talk to me. Don't plot against me. We tried talking. No, you tried convincing. There's a difference. Talking means listening to my answers even when you don't like them. Brian stood up, took the folder. So this is it? We just pretend the last 3 months didn't happen? No. We acknowledge them. We learn from them. We establish new boundaries. Boundaries enforced by blackmail. Boundaries enforced by consequences. Same thing you were trying to establish for me. They left together. Jessica looked back once, expression unreadable. Brian didn't look back at all. I sat at that picnic table for another hour. Let the reality settle in. I'd won, for now. They'd back off because the cost of continuing was too high. But something in me felt hollow. This wasn't victory. This was just survival. Protecting myself from people who should have protected me instead. That's what hurt most. Not that they'd tried to control me, but that they'd thought it was justified. That their concern had blinded them to what they were actually doing. Maybe they'd understand eventually. Maybe not. Either way, I'd made it clear. My life, my choices, my terms, nobody was taking that from me.